that in bringing two CCGs together that cover such a big geography, there's a real opportunity for us to be able to use new technology and new approaches to allow people to find this evening accessible. So I'm just going to wave to the colleagues at the back who are going to switch us into that mode. So it looks like we are good to go on that front. Which means I'm also going to start off by saying something that might be slightly repetitive from the opening piece for the benefit of anyone who might be out there watching us on YouTube, either live or watching us on catch-up. I think if we do have any voting exercises and you're watching on catch-up, please be aware that your votes may not count for this evening's discussion. Question time will have closed when we get to the end of the session. So really warm welcome again to everyone here tonight. My name's Toby. I'm the Joint Chief Executive of the two commissioning groups. This is my first AGM in Northamptonshire. I came to Northamptonshire in November last year and was appointed as the first Joint Chief Executive role across the two commissioning groups, very much to continue the journey of bringing the two organisations together. I'm delighted to say that we've got a great mix of people in the room today who play a whole host of roles within the two commissioning groups. I'm actually flanked slightly nervously by my two clinical chairs who are here, by Darren and Joe, who are going to be coming up to speak in a minute and will introduce themselves. But I'd also just like to ask some of my other colleagues in the room just to give a wave. We've got a number of our lay members who are involved in the clinical commissioning groups who are in the room. Give us a bit of a wave there. That's brilliant. Great contribution they make to the work that we do. We've also got a good number of the clinical leads, the GPs in particular, who are involved in our board work. So if we've got some GP clinical leads in the room, give us a wave. That's tremendous. And then we've got a number of the management support team, both some of my director team and some of the other staff who work in the organisations. Perhaps give us a wave as well. I shan't carry on going round because I'm conscious that we could spend a bit more time doing that. But it gives you a sense. We've got a lot of people in the room tonight who make a huge contribution to the work of the clinical commissioning groups. We've got a good number of partner organisations in the room as well in terms of some of our providers and some of the other organisations locally. So that should make for a really great session. At that point, I'm going to hand over to the two chairs. They will introduce themselves and they're going to take us through our first piece this evening, which is a bit of a reflection back and look at the year that was 2018-2019.
Okay, so for those of you that haven't met me, so I'm going to stay near the mic because I tend to wander off a bit. I'm Joanne Watt, I'm a Corby GP. I've been a Corby GP for the last 14 years and for the last 4 years I've been chair of Corby CCG. One of the things particularly to remark upon with Toby is that actually having attended both Corby and NEN's AGMs last year, they were remarkably similar. A lot of the things we're doing, we work together, and it's important to note, there we go, that there are lots of things that the CCGs have been doing together for a number of years, and so it seemed logical to make sure that we share with our public, with the Northamptonshire public, as we work together, some of the achievements that we have, some of the areas that we've been working on, particularly in the last year. In particular, the quality of care, and that's something that very much came up on the table that I was just talking with. Quality of care is really important, and we have a very strong quality team, and we monitor that across the whole county. And although there are some people who don't want to talk about money, I think everybody wants to talk about the quality of care that our patients receive. And so we are working together to make sure that we commission the right services and the right quality of care. These are some of the things that we've been trying to do, trying to make sure that people get the right care, that they get out of hospital. For some of those people, that will be a transfer to care homes, but for other people, obviously, we're still trying to make sure that people get back to their own homes. Feet is something that is very important. I know whenever we've talked about feet within this county, people get very, very engaged. And obviously looking after foot care, particularly for patients with diabetes, is something that we've been working on very much together. Mental health underpins everything that we do. Even our physical services, you cannot do that without being cognizant of people's mental health. Mental health goes through everything that we do, even if it's not in the title. And in particular, perinatal, which means mental health around the time that a baby comes into a family, is really important. Looking at the family, looking at the mum, and looking at the care of the baby as well. Looking at our nurse training, our workforce is important. If we don't train the right workforce, we can't possibly look after the population. And obviously maternity services. There's been a lot of work on maternity services. For those of you that haven't seen it, the maternity website and the guide that we have for our websites it is on our website, and you may want to have a little look at that, which is a guide for people in the county as to what to expect from maternity services. Children's mental health is very important, and obviously we work very closely with our partners as well, and in particular recently we've been working very closely with Health Watch as we engage with our population, and that helps us to really understand what people's experiences are, what people are going through, and we are starting to very much work together with our population and with obviously our providers, our community mental health providers, looking at what we can do to improve children's mental health. Primary care services we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail a little bit later on, but we know that this is an issue for people. For those of you that have looked at the National Survey for your GP surgery, you will find that actually people have a variable experience of access to their primary care services. It is something that you will see on social media, and we know that it's really important for our population. And so it is something we're focusing on, and Julie's going to tell us a little bit more about that a little bit later on. We know that there are some things where services are very specialised, so particular things like stroke services, cardiology, heart services, you need specialised staff, you need specialised equipment, and what we're looking at those is basically what can we do on the county-wide basis that means that people get the very, very best care. It may mean that people need to travel a bit further, but they will get better outcomes. And one of the other things that we've worked really hard on is looking at veterans and those in the armed forces as well. So I'm proud to say that I have signed the county-wide Armed Forces Covenant. It is extremely important. We are working both in primary care and with our secondary care colleagues as well to make sure that we recognise the need of veterans. They are different, to make sure that all of our referral forms acknowledge that veterans need to be recognised and that we uphold the Armed Forces Covenant. And that's something we're really proud of the work on that we've been doing, particularly over the last year. And obviously looking at us as CCGs, as employers as well, to recognise those who are in the armed forces or have been in the past. And we're pleased to say that on the rating from last year that we were both CCGs were rated as good. That's obviously NHS England looks at the way that we perform, looks at the way that we monitor services and the way that we spend money wisely. And we were pleased to be rated as good, but it is extremely hard work to continue to achieve those ratings. And really that's thanks to all of our teams and all of our partners across the county, and we're very grateful for everything that people have done to help us to achieve that rating. I'm going to hand over to Darren.
So I won't reiterate for the sake of time. We've got a huge number of slides, so I'll try and be quick and rifle through this. So my name's Darren Seeger. I'm Joe's counterpart. I'm a GP in Northampton. I won't say how many years I've been a GP because that will give away my age. Again, just following on from Joe, so I want to focus more on the hospital side of things, and because that takes up a huge amount of our budget, as our Stuart will go into in a little bit more detail. But we're really pleased that across our 3 hospitals, things are definitely improving, and we have one of the very few outstanding community and mental health trusts in the country. So well done, Krishni and her team, who's here. Kettering General Hospital faced a huge number of challenges, and they've done a lot of work to get to requires improvement. So we are really pleased with that. And Northampton General Hospital equally have done a lot of work and have been rated as good. Across, so as Joe said, we're rated as good across the board, but in terms of some of our performance achievements, I won't go through all of those, but ones that are sort of more particularly important are the cancer ones. So we know obviously how important sort of cancer screening, cancer pickup rates are in terms of everyone in the CCG. Is one of the legacies we want to leave behind, that we improve this. So we are overachieving on the 31-day wait for drug treatment and radiotherapy. So that's from diagnosis to actually getting your treatment, and that impacts on the chances of people surviving. And then we also do really well on the 62 wait from screening. So these are people who have screening tests like mammograms or smears or bowel tests. from the time that they have the screening to the time of treatment, we achieve over the performance targets for that. Mental health is a huge issue and growing issue for the country, and especially what's going on at the moment. So we have these psychological therapies that's really proven in treatment that's not medication, but really helps people improve their well-being through this. And we achieve more than the national standards across a lot of those areas. But there's a lot of challenges ahead. So I know, as Joe mentioned, especially with primary care, but equally in the hospitals, probably our biggest challenge is around urgent care and A&E waits, and that affects really the quality of life for patients and the quality of care that can be delivered in the hospital. So there's a huge amount of focus on that. The ambulance response times and handovers as a consequence is also impacted. There are some other cancer performance standards that we're really focusing on, and as Ali is our clinical lead, who spends a huge amount of his time working on that. And I'll just... Yeah, so I won't draw those out. These slides, I'm sure, will be available on our website, so you can go into more detail. So if I hand it back to Toby.
Thank you, Joe and Darren. I did say this was going to be a real whistle-stop tour. We are going to canter through a lot of content quite rapidly, intentionally, because we wanted to give you a flavour of a number of the things that have been working well, some things that have been more challenging, and some of the key areas of work that we're involved with at the moment. We're also keen to canter through so we can get to the opportunity at the end for some open discussion and get into a conversation with people. That last area was focused very much on 1819 and the things that we delivered during 1819. I just wanted to add a sort of personal thanks in relation to that particular financial year that we're here to have an annual general meeting around tonight. I mentioned at the start that I came to Northamptonshire in November of last year, so I was working with the CCGs for 5 months of that year. For the rest of that year, I'd like to add my thanks to Carol Degani, who was the interim joint accountable officer for both CCGs and have worked for many years with Corby as well as their accountable officer, who did a great job of helping to bridge through during that transition period. Carol's not with us this evening, but I'd like to add my thanks on record to her. And also to Stuart, who is here, who's my Chief Finance Officer, who also for a couple of months last year before I arrived acted into the accountable officer role as well and helped to keep the organisation, the board and the management support team running well. So a personal thank you from me to those two people who played a key part of that year, and particularly to Carol, who's not here with us this evening. The conversation we've just been having in the material was very much around the work of the CCGs during that period, but the clinical commissioning groups absolutely do not work and operate in isolation. And one of the biggest shifts and changes over 1819 and carrying forward into this year has been about how the commissioning groups work as part of a wider health and care system across Northamptonshire, how we work with our other partners. And we do that through something you might have heard us talk about and might have come into contact with, called the Northamptonshire Health and Care Partnership. In essence, the Health and Care Partnership is about how public sector, voluntary sector organisations, professional bodies come together to do the right thing for the people of Northamptonshire. This is about looking at place, it's looking about Northamptonshire as a county and the different places within it, from neighbourhood levels through to districts and boroughs, and in the future into our unitary arrangements, and working together in a best for Northamptonshire and best for local people way. You will all know in this room that the public sector and the NHS, more than most parts of the public sector, is slightly complicated in terms of its organisational arrangements. We have lots of different bodies with lots of different boards, and the huge drive at the moment is about how we get those different parts of the NHS and then the wider public sector working together in a much more seamless way so that we don't have those handoffs, we don't have those moments where patients sometimes drop between the gaps in terms of services, and we don't have those wranglings that we all know sometimes play into discussions about the funding of care and whose responsibility, particularly between health and social care, that may be. So the development over the last few years of the Northamptonshire Health and Care Partnership is a really important piece in the role of the clinical commissioning groups, both to date and also the role that we play moving forwards. And it's very much focused on practically how can we improve local health and care services for our population, for that 741,000 people that we serve within Northamptonshire. There's a real focus on primary care and community services, in particular on how we can identify people in terms of people at risk of developing conditions at an earlier stage, how we can support them, how we can put care plans in place, how we can coordinate their care across different partners in order to deliver a better outcome and a better managed experience for those patients. It's also about how our acute hospitals work more closely together. Kettering and Northampton are working ever closer together in something they call their unified acute model work. That simply means doing the right thing across the two hospital sites, and in particular the way that the clinical teams work together to make sure that we make best use of the tremendous skills that we've got and the tremendous quality services we have in many of those two provider organisations. It's about mental health and about broader health and well-being, and it's also about the primary care piece and urgent care and how we work together. So we've got some really clear areas of focus, and I know a lot of people in the room are involved, both from a patient point of view and also from a service provider point of view, in how the partnership works together to do the best thing for people locally. A bit like Darren, I shan't walk through each of these bullet points. They're here and people can read and look at these afterwards. But they summarise some of the key things that we've made good progress on over that 18-19 year. We have made some good progress in the move towards digitisation and the NHS moving out of the paper world and more into the digital world. And that isn't just an end in itself. It does tie back to that piece about care planning and making sure that wherever a patient presents, whatever time of day, whatever day of the week, that we've got access to the right understanding of someone's existing care plan, the treatment they might be in receipt of, the medication that they might be receiving, and to make sure that that helps to join up care between different parts of the system. We've also done some particular work around stroke services, and it's been a big area of focus over the last couple of years locally across all the different partner agencies, recognising that no individual part of the system can make the changes we need to make in order to improve care and outcomes for patients on their own. We can only do it if we all pull together and if we all hang together. That's not always easy because the NHS does run in a world which has statutory organisations and boards like the ones here we're talking about in terms of our annual general meeting. But there is a massive commitment and drive clinically and managerially and across those partner organisations that recognises we need to do things better, we need to do things in a more streamlined way, we need to reduce the handoffs and trade-offs between organisations, and ultimately we need to get back, particularly from an NHS world, to one NHS and operating in a way that generally is best for patients rather than being too focused on what makes sense for individual organisations. How will we know whether any of that makes a difference? Well, fundamentally, we'll know because we'll see it in the evidence and the data about the health outcomes and the feedback we get from patients in terms of their experience of care. Healthwatch helped us to run a really brilliant session a couple of months ago in Northampton. Myself and a good number of people were in the room as part of the development of our long-term plan locally. And we had probably a couple of hundred people in the room that day, and they were sharing their experiences of health and care. I know there's a number of members of the public and patients in the room who were part of that day. And that gave us a really powerful insight into what's the practical reality for patients and for carers and for their families in relation to a whole host of different service areas locally. So fundamentally, we will know if things have worked because we'll see it in the outcomes, we'll see it in the health data, we'll know it because patients and the public will tell us about what's working and what's not. And if we get all of those things right, that vision we have as a partnership about a positive lifetime of health, well-being and care in our community will feel like a reality for people. I'm not naive, I'm not simplistic, I recognise that's a really big ask and it's a really big goal to be looking to move towards. But the commitment is absolutely there from the clinicians and our organisations across the system to make a reality of this over the next few years. Would you like a glass of water there? You okay? Yeah, no, don't worry. If you need to get up and walk around at all, that's absolutely fine. It's a bit dry in here, isn't it, the air? We have put the aircon on to try and cool the room a bit, but it is a little bit dry. So at that point, I'm going to hand over to our Chief Finance Officer, to Stuart Rees, who's going to walk us through one of those very structured parts of our annual general meetings and to share with you some of the statutory things we have to share about our financial positions over that year of 18-19. Stuart.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. This is a bit, a very formal bit. I have to tell you how we did last year and what we're going to plan to spend the money on this year. So it has to be done. And I will answer Darren's question that he didn't tell me he was going to say that I'll answer during the presentation. So it's not part, but I will give you the answer at the end. So, I'm Sir Rhys. I'm the Chief Finance Officer for both CCGs. So, I'm going to have to go through this twice. I'll try to do it quickly. But it's because we have two statutory organisations, I have to do it twice. So, you'll have to bear with me a little bit. Okay, so Corby first. So I'm going to tell you how we did and what we're going to plan to do, how much per resident, and where that money kind of goes. So, statutorily, these are the obligations that we have to do. Yeah. So the first one is we get given, as Toby correctly highlighted in his presentation, between both CCGs, over 900 million. So last year, for Corby, 112. It must stay within that amount of money. And it did. It broke even. So, tick one. Then we get an allowance that is for running the CCG and its support services. Again, it has to stay within that. It did, slightly below. So achieved. We then have to pay non-NHS invoices, 95% of them within 30 days. Actually, overachieved 99. So, well done to everybody who does that. And obviously, cash is very important. We've got to stay within our cash limit. And we did, and we had a small amount of money left at the end of the year, £48,000, which if you think when you're spending 112, that's not very much. That's quite tight. But all achieved, so all done. Where does the money go? I'm not sure if people can see the sort of percentages there, but in essence, this shows where the money goes. By far, the majority goes to the two counts in the county and other counts outside. So, at the point, it was probably a good point to sort of say how much, for Darren's question, we actually spend of our total budget, both CCGs, 56.8% of the budget. So, 543 million with the three main providers in the county, the hospital trusts. So, by far the majority of the money across both CCGs goes to them. Clear. If you then to break that down into residences per person, this is how it gets funded across. So again, obviously the acute services are far the highest. And that's how much per person Corby gets, in essence, £1,400 for its population, which when you think of it, isn't very much to cover what people need. So, how we plan to spend the money? Virtually most percentage terms quite similar to last year. So no major shift. But as people will read from the long-term plan, there was a big requirement to try and get some of that shift, the left shift, and that's where the CCG's commissioning plan will be going forward. So, Corby, we also received 6.6% uplift. That isn't growth, that's an uplift, because there are things that go through, pass-through payments, we would call them, or changes in prices that have to go to sort of other providers, like ambulances, trusts, your trusts. So not all of that is what we would call growth. So the average growth across all CCGs this year, the average nationally is 1.57%. So, but it is slightly higher for both Corby and NEN, just slightly higher than the average overall. So, it's good news. Hit all the targets. But it's not an easy thing to do in the public sector at the moment. A lot of places have deficits. So, I'll then move on to NEN. So, very similar again. I won't go through the slide again, so we'll go over it. I'm going to tell you the same things, but basically about NEN CCG. So, NEN, again, first target, it broke even. It achieved it in year. It stayed within its cash limit. It paid, again, 99% of its invoices on time. And it stayed within its cash. And again, 277,000 available left at year end on a 800 million. Quite tight in reality. But it's not meant to generate lots of profit. You have to remember, we're meant to spend it. We're meant to give it to our partner organisations, the people with the contracts. So we're meant to be that tight. So people are doing well. Again, percentages, as you will see, they're very similar to Corby, but that's because, as you heard from Toby and the two chairs, we work so closely together, we pretty much mirror, so there's not much difference between. So the slight difference being, at the moment, why Nen's like, Corby is a delegated CCG and Nen isn't, so that money for the primary care co-commissioning bit sits with NHS England and not with Nen. Just slightly more per head they get. Not that they spend less as a county and different, that money just sits with NHS England. So again, this year, going ahead where we are now, we plan to spend money roughly in the same places. Not much change at this point. And that pretty much is the end of the presentation. And answer Darren's question at the same time. So thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. There will be an opportunity at the end to ask questions of any of the speakers who've contributed this evening. I hope you managed to follow some of that. There was quite a bit of detail in there, and that was genuinely the fairly straightforward plain English version of NHS finances in the two CCGs, but I appreciate there's still some jargon and some language used in there, so I hope you managed to follow enough of that. My key sort of slight add to that from a financial point of view, the two CCGs in Northamptonshire have done a very good job of managing the budgets and the finances over the years that they've existed. And you can see that reflected in what Stuart's just described, the position for 18-19 that lived within the means that we were allocated. There's a slight but to that, and the slight but is the years that we're going into get harder, not easier at the moment, notwithstanding whatever might fall out of national discussions around allocations and spending reviews in future years. And that does mean the population growth that we see, the ageing population, the increasing number of people living with multiple conditions, in many respects is tremendous. From a societal point of view, we've got people living longer than ever and better supported than ever with advances in modern medicine and healthcare. But the cost of providing that healthcare, from a staff point of view, from a buildings point of view, from an equipment, a drugs and medication point of view, always increases year on year. So although there is more money, as Stuart says, coming into the NHS over the next few years, that rarely keeps pace with the level of demand that there is there within health and within care services. So collectively, with our partner organisations locally and with the local authorities, particularly in terms of adult social care, in terms of public health, in terms of children's services, we've got a real challenge on our hands over the next few years to make sure that we manage as well as we've been able to in the last few years and the numbers that Stuart's just been presented. So we are going to move at this point into a slightly different tack. Julie's going to come up and join us, and I think this was trailed earlier on by Joe, to talk a little bit about one of those topics that I think in almost every forum I go to when I'm out meeting members of the public and talking to other healthcare staff, they're always really interested in what's happening around primary care, what's happening around general practice, what are some of the big changes that are going on. And as a membership organisation with our 71 GP practices, this of course is a really core part of what we do. So Julie, over to you.
Thank you, Toby. And good afternoon, or still good afternoon, everybody. The bar's not open yet, so it can't be the evening. I'm just going to run through a few things that actually are happening locally, as well as the kind of national backdrop around the things that are happening, especially around the workforce. So there is primary care needing GPs, needing nurses, practice nurses, and the way that actually we're trying to attract people in. It's a national issue, it's a national problem, but we're trying to work really hard to be able to attract new staff and new people and new roles into Northamptonshire. And I think actually we're probably doing quite well, which is really good news. I'm sure there's not enough people for enough staff for the GPs, but we are actually on the right side of some of the things that we're doing. So we have an extra 200 medical student places in Northamptonshire, which is fantastic. We exceeded our GP specialist trainee places, again, which is really very, very good. And I think it was on Joe's slide around the fact that the recruitment for practice nursing is a national first. And we were on the TV and everything, so that was all really good to be able to actually recruit and bring practice nursing and training into individual practices to boost the support around that. We're still seeing a declining trend in GPs, but through a lot of hard work, we've been able to attract further 22 GPs from our international recruitment, which actually is one of the highest levels in the country. So we're doing something really well here, and that, I think we just need to keep going and doing that attraction and making sure that it's county-wide. So a lot of this stuff that we're doing, we're not just doing it in pockets, we're actually working together with lots of people, and it's being done over a county-wide footprint. So there's a new GP contract that came into place earlier in the year, and it was brought in quite quickly, which is often the way that NHS England does things. But we stepped up, and our practices were fantastic, and they completely stepped up as well. And now we have 16 groups of practices that are called primary care networks. So this is about practices working closely together to be able to support their patients, yeah, and their populations. But the other thing that is a part of this contract is additional workforce. So coming back to the fact that we need more people, more support within general practice, then this is really good news again. So this year, it's a graduated additional workforce over the next 3 years, and in this year there are additional clinical pharmacists and additional social prescribing link workers, which our colleague Stuart will tell us more about in a moment. And we also have clinical directors that each PCN has got a clinical director that's a GP that works in one of the practices, and their responsibility very much is around looking after the health and the well-being of that population. We're also making sure that we get some some career opportunities for people as well, because making something that's quite exciting to work in, it makes people want to stay. So this is really good news. And given that there are 16 PCNs and there's the number of staff that potentially are going to be additional, it would work out at about 80 new people over the next couple of years. So it's quite substantial, which is really, really helpful. So our 16 primary care networks, there are 4 in the south, there are 4 in, no there aren't, there's 4 in the south, there's 6 in Northampton, and there's 6 in North Northamptonshire. They range between 30 and 77,000 population, so this is the groupings of practices that have naturally come together, and we had the guarantee that we had to give is that we would have 100% population coverage. So everybody in the county is covered by a primary care network. But the primary care networks have to also be together. Right? So the practices, you can't have a practice over here and one over here and one over here. Right? The practices need to be, the word's called contiguous, which means they either have to be, the practice boundaries have to be up against each other or they have to overlap. So that gives a covering then, so that when the GPs and the services come together, then it will be across a population that lives near each other. Okay. So just to take you through, so that is the Northamptonshire map. That's our 100% coverage, which is, and these are the 16 PCNs. And just to go through, so this is North Northamptonshire, which covers East Northants, Wellingborough, Corby and Kettering. We then have South Northamptonshire, which is Daventry and the south of the county. And then we have Northampton Town, where we've got the 6 that cover the population of Northampton. So that's how the county is kind of broke up into the primary care networks. So that's additional staffing as well, and people that are going to be coming into there. Now I'm just going to quickly move on to integration. So Toby was talking about, bringing services together, bringing services to a point where you've got health and social care and mental health and general practice. So the PCN, so the primary care network footprints start to give us that platform of being able to bring people to work together more closely so that they can support people to be independent and not go into hospital and stop that before the crisis, right? Or to a point where actually people do sometimes have to go into hospital, so into hospital, and then you're quickly brought back out with support in the community. So this is about these types of staff, these people. I'm working very closely with NHFT, I'm working very closely with the County Council. And now we have the PCN footprints and we know what they look like, then we're going to start to be putting some of these services around the population so that it's actually far more available to people rather than it being a very centralised model. And it will be about care at home, and it will be about rapid intervention. And it's that bit about wrapping a team around an individual depending on what their needs are. And so that would be also extra support around our primary care and our general practice to make sure that patients are supported much closer to their home. And that's the new care model. That's the diagram to make it diagrammatical. So we have the patient and the families in the middle. We are talking about a PCN footprint, which is the multicoloured bits. That's the primary care footprint where you would have a range of services that have come together. And then there will still be need for some economies of scale that need to be done at a bigger level. Yet, so that might be on a locality, which are those three that I mentioned to you before. And some things will need to be done on a Northamptonshire footprint because, you know, they're far more specialist. And then we have, you know, the ambulance service that actually works across the region, right? So there's scales on these circles, but what we're really concentrating on is that multicoloured bit in the middle that is saying we're going to have community and social care and mental health and voluntary sector, etc. services on a footprint, right, that is going to be closer to the community and be community shaped. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Really interesting stuff there. And for me, one of the most exciting developments actually at the moment within the NHS, the development of primary care networks and what that offers in terms of the ability to join things up at a much more local level in a really real way for patients. When I talk to patients and to clinicians, they often say, feels like we've lost some of the team in kind of out of hospital part of the system, practices and the staff that work on a community basis with them. People often don't really know each other well enough anymore, but they're often supporting the same patients and working with the same families and carers in local areas. And this is an opportunity to put some of that right, to kind of get the team back together again, but to be able to add to it and add extra resource and extra staffing into it. We've seen so much investment and growth in funding, as Stuart said earlier on, into some of our big organisations, into the acute hospitals in particular. This really is about how do we build some of that resource and skill set and capacity in the out-of-hospital sector. So hugely exciting. Equally exciting is what Stuart's now going to talk to us about for a few moments. I touched earlier on the Health and Care Partnership and talked about how that brings together a whole host of organisations to do the right thing for Northamptonshire. Stuart's going to talk to us briefly now on one of the particular pieces of work that he's been heavily involved in leading and shaping around social prescribing.
Thank you, Toby. My name's Stuart. I'm just going to provide you with a brief overview of our programme to implement social prescribing at scale across Northamptonshire. So what really causes ill health? There's been a fair bit of research over the years, and though it comes up with slightly differing conclusions, the overall conclusions are the same. Our health is determined by our genetics, lifestyle, the healthcare we receive, and our wider economic, physical and social environment. Although estimates vary, as you'll see on there, these wider determinants of health have the largest impact. So given that conclusion, a key question for our healthcare system is how can we help people to help themselves and bend that trend from medicalisation to socialisation. And this was a term that we used some time ago in a health and wellbeing forum, because I think generally clinical colleagues agree that people are medicalised, not not deliberately, it's just the way it pans out in terms of short GP consultations and their access to healthcare. So what is social prescribing? Basically, social prescribing provides a non-clinical means of addressing our people's needs, social, economic and environmental, in a way that enables them to take greater control of their health and well-being. It's therefore a way for primary and secondary care colleagues to refer patients with social, emotional or practical needs into a large range of local non-clinical services. If I just give you a brief summary of our programme. So our programme will encompass a range of support in the community and in some cases commissioned to supplement mental and physical health and well-being prevention and treatment through a wide range of non-clinical, social, emotional and practical schemes. It's our objective to build sustainability and resilience in our communities and the VCSE sector through developing county-wide collaborative services that operate consistently and at scale and are available for everyone. The necessary processes and actions to develop protocols and provide continuing and acceptable quality assurance to referrers is also in the process of being established. At the heart of our social prescribing is a link worker-led framework, and that's about personal consultation and or motivational interviewing with individuals and finding out effectively what the root cause social issues are. Our programme will be focused on those with the greatest need and likelihood of benefiting. So its initial focus is going to particularly concentrate on people living with 2 or more long-term conditions, people with mental health and wellness issues, working with Mark Major and his team about more support for carers, and people who are deemed as or seen as living in social isolation. However, from the outset, the whole way of us building the infrastructure for this will be developed in a way to enable everyone to benefit, but we've initially got a focus in terms of the cohorts that we're looking at working with. And our offer involves also a variety of schemes that are typically, though not exclusively, provided by VCSE organisations. So we'll also be working with our new local authority, unitary authorities to around the areas that they actually can provide social support. And then I just wanted to touch on progress made to date. So socialisation and alignment, we've been working closely with a lot of the other Northamptonshire Health and Care Partnership work streams that have been discussed earlier today. We've been talking with patient groups. We won't have talked with all patients, but we're doing our best in terms of talking to patient engagement groups around the county. We've been working closely with health and wellbeing fora around Northamptonshire, and we also held a series of, and there'll be more, 3 cross-county engagement events that some of you may have been able to attend. There will be other ones as we actually implement this programme of work. They were based in Daventry, Kettering and just outside Northampton. Link workers. Julia's already described that one of the new recruits into the primary care networks is the social prescribing link worker, and we've appointed 16 of them as I understand it, and a number of them have started actually working now. And the intention is that this programme of work, which is slightly sitting behind the actual recruitment of those individuals, will all align up so that we can actually work with the primary care network link workers to have the greatest beneficial impact on the people of Northamptonshire. Some of you might have experienced or seen there's a Northamptonshire Directory of Services that's being developed now. It's based on a pre-existing model that's used in a number of communities around the country. It's called MIDOS. And basically the objective of the Directory of Service we've put together is a single point of access. So it's a route into other directories if other directories hold the information that's of use. And it's also about one version of the truth. So it's not intending to duplicate other directories, but merely work with those directories. And that's already been soft launched and is actually in use in our 2 acute hospitals and a number of our GP practices. I talked before about VCSE assurance, so we've got a 3-tier model of assurance that colleagues from Voluntary Impact Northamptonshire are working with a number of VCSE organisations about how that might look and work and what support we can give to organisations. Evaluation will be a key aspect of this, about basically the evidence of positive impact on the use of health and care services, and particularly around what we would call the attribution. So it's about actually saying, is it as a result of social prescribing or a number of other things that Toby and his team are aiming at similar problems around the Northamptonshire health and care system. And partner engagement. And I just wanted to touch very briefly on partner engagement, because we've got a funding model that's effectively a tripartite arrangement. So it's about the system working with a thing called the Life Chances Fund, which is a national lottery grant-funded outcomes framework, and also with the social investor to actually kick-start this off. So there are effectively 3 partners, and the social investor actually brings expertise from work it's done elsewhere in the country, particularly in the Gateshead area around social prescribing. And in terms of the implementation timescale, we had a full business case and prioritisation approved at the CCG's governing body meeting 2 weeks ago. As I've said before, we've got the 16 primary care network social prescribing link workers are actually commencing employment now. System financial plan approval is from October, so Stuart didn't particularly mention that, but that's kind of the next thing on the financial agenda around the funds that the CCG has. If everything goes to plan, mobilisation of the overall larger programme between January and April 2020, and then a go-live of May 2020. So that's really the date when we would see individuals in Northamptonshire seeing a difference in the way that health and care is being provided.
Thank you, Stuart. That really is a very, very innovative, very progressive service model in terms of the work that's being developed there. Stuart has put a huge amount of energy and time into working, as well as Lucy Whiteman, who was here with us earlier on, I know, and other colleagues across the system. But I want to make a particular thank you to the voluntary and community sector partner organisations, of which I can see a good number of them in the room as well today. This will only work if we're able to work together in that kind of networked way. But there's an opportunity here to really shift that kind of dial. Going back to your opening slide with those 3 pie charts, what are the real determinants of health and of ill health and poor health, to move that into more of a social and move that into a less medicalised model of looking at that. That's all the evidence internationally says if we can get into that kind of space as commissioners, that's where the real opportunity is to make massive improvements to kind of the health outcomes and to life expectancy and to the health and well-being of the population. So it's not easy, particularly in the financial context that I touched on earlier on. We're going to have to make choices about things going forward. But I was really pleased that when we had a big discussion on this a couple of weeks ago, both of the boards of the 2 clinical commissioning groups are absolutely committed to wanting to find a way to make this work and make that kind of leap into something that is genuinely more transformational and genuinely going to make a bigger system change for us. So you'll be pleased to note, those of you being in the room following us on the agendas, or those of you who are online watching us live streamed, that we are slightly ahead of schedule. That is not accidental. I spoke with both chairs before we got started, and we said, look, let's try and cover a lot of ground very fast, because we're really keen to get to the questions bit. So I will just give you a little reminder there, a few moments to think whilst I'm just covering the last couple of things we want to share with you, about questions that you might want to put to any of our speakers or to anyone else that's in the room from the commissioning groups. So looking forward, just a few thoughts from me, and much of this brings together and summarises what we've already shared with you this evening. There's a huge piece of work underway at the moment across the Health and Care Partnership, across the whole of Northamptonshire, looking at our local response to the NHS National Long-Term Plan. Many of you will be in the room, will be familiar that earlier this year, the national bodies published that long-term plan for the NHS, which sets out a lot of the objectives and priorities for improving health and care for people across the country. We're in the process at the moment between here and the middle of November of translating that into a local plan for Northamptonshire. What are the things that we need to do to make a real difference to outcomes, to patient experience, to use of resources across Northamptonshire? Yes, there's some national requirements as part of that. There always are. The additional funding growth, the 21 billion coming into the NHS over the next few years, does come quite rightly with a political expectation of what the NHS will deliver for that. But there's a real opportunity for all of the partner organisations locally to get behind a smaller number of key priorities that we want to make a big difference for people locally around. Some of those are inevitably going to be the kind of things you were discussing on your roundtables earlier on, particularly the work around frailty and the work around health and care integration. So there's a big piece through the partnership at the moment around developing that local longer term plan. That's kind of a whole other set of presentations and an evening we could have done on that. But if people are interested, do have a look online at the Health and Care Partnership Board's website, because there's some really good material on there that sets out some of the thinking here. And really critically at the minute, there's also some great work on there looking for feedback from patients, from the public, from staff. I know a number of people in the room have completed some of the survey work that's there online. And it's a great way for you to tell us in a bit more detail your thoughts on the things you think that we should be focusing on as a partnership and two commissioning groups. Julie's touched on primary care network, so I shan't repeat the conversation there. And I've talked as well about the partnership earlier. Last couple of thoughts then on our plans really for the year looking forward that we're into and into the following year. As Darren's referenced, whilst we're making good progress in delivering a lot of things that we would want to through our providers for patients locally, we know there are some constitutional standards, some of the national standards that we don't do well enough around, and that we let down local people in those areas. And we're very focused on those areas around urgent and emergency care, some of the cancer standard areas, and also some of the learning disability services in terms of inpatient residential care, and the work that we want to do to support people to live more independently for that small number of people, but very critical, vulnerable people that we have responsibility for. Another big theme in terms of the work we're doing, and tonight really symbolises this. Tonight has been the first opportunity for bringing the two commissioning groups together into a single AGM and single annual general meeting. With a fair wind, by the time we get to this time next year, we'll be having a conversation with you all that is about a single Northamptonshire clinical commissioning group. The work of the last couple of years of bringing the two commissioning groups ever closer together, our governing bodies, and we're currently working with our member practices to get their views on this set of proposals. But we're proposing to move from next April to creating a single commissioning group for the whole of Northamptonshire. We think there's an opportunity in there, and our clinicians do, to be able to do things even better for local people. We think there's an opportunity to be more efficient in our resources, rather than having two sets of accounts and two separate auditors and two sets of advisors in a number of different areas. And really importantly, we think it makes sense in terms of how that links with the development of the Health and Care Partnership and the things that we should be playing a really important role on once in terms of that strategy and the development of the outcomes framework for Northamptonshire. So many of you will have been involved in some of the public events we've held over the last couple of months. And again, if you haven't had time to feed in your thoughts so far, then we'd be really interested either to talk in the question session coming up next, or to hear your thoughts in response to the feedback that again is live on our CCG websites at the moment. And then the last reference that I'll make in here in terms of the focus around prevention and around self-care. And that isn't something that we've necessarily majored on this evening. We've picked a few topic areas that we felt were really important, but it's absolutely central to the work around the social prescribing work and also the work of the primary care networks. This is about trying to move to an agenda that's more about prevention, early identification and support, and less on a treatment and an illness model. We, of course, always need and want the NHS to be there when we need it in those moments of crisis, but we think there's more we can do over the next few years that will make a bigger difference for people locally if we get more into that territory. So, at that point, we have 10 minutes ahead of schedule, got 20 minutes or so for questions and discussions. Thank you for bearing with us over that. We've covered an awful lot of ground. That was intentional. We've given you a real taster of the huge amount of work that we're involved with on behalf of the public in Northamptonshire, on behalf of our member practices. We've got a whole host of people in the room that can help in taking questions at this point. I've got two chairs who I think are going to leap up and grab microphones from here as well. And we've got a real mixture of the team in the room who can help to respond to questions as well. So I'm just going to start off by seeing if there's anyone in the room that wants to give us an opening question. We've had a couple that have been submitted in advance as well, which we can turn to if we need to. But just please raise your hand and someone will come to you with a microphone. And if you could just introduce yourself and then ask your question. So the gentleman in the centre of the room had his hand up first. So if Darren's able to make the way across there, and then we'll come to you, sir, on the right-hand side. If you're watching at home, I'm not sure how well this will work in terms of being able to see people speaking, but you should be able to hear the questions.
Certainly don't want to be on YouTube. But,
That's fine.
Thank you for the
Great
opportunity.
fan of it then.
My name's David Treadrear and I'm chair of the Desborough and Rothwell PPG. I'm also a CQC special advisor as well. I'm fascinated by your budgets. My understanding is that your budget is set for next year and that you are on target to meet all those needs. If, as is expected, the Chancellor gives you a Mars bar of gold next week, or in fact a truck full of gold next week, will you be using that money for accelerating your existing programme, or, because it's bonus money, using it for, say, voluntary groups that are not getting any funding because you've already made the allocation to achieve your budget for this year already?
I will ask my Chief Finance Officer, Stuart, to comment in a moment on that, but just a brief word from me before handing across to him, and while he's just gathering his thoughts. It's a really good question, and yeah, any of us who work in the NHS are going to welcome more funding coming to the NHS. It's always a good thing, and if some of that materialises on the back of some of the things that are happening nationally, that's got to be welcomed. We do have our budgets that are allocated and set for this year and into next year, but as I touched on earlier on, they are under real strain, and as many of the members of our governing bodies are only two cited, we have a real challenge this year to be able to live within the means that are allocated to us. My priority as the accountable officer for the two commissioning groups is always to make the best use of new money that comes in, and wherever possible to be able to put that into developing new things, into funding some of the stuff we've talked about today, things like the social prescribing work, which will ultimately lead to more resource going into the voluntary and community sector. But I'm equally conscious that there are areas where we are already off track in terms of some of our financial positions, and elements of that will inevitably need to help to support and bridge some of those positions. But Stuart, you might want to add to that.
Yeah, thank you, Toby. So, obviously we don't know what value that would be, the trough of pot of gold, as you say. Whatever happens, there is never enough money. Never is. So what the governing body would do, we would take the budgets through our finance committee into the governing body, and we would prioritise those areas that we think are the necessary clinical things that we need to do for the next few years. And that's how we would go about it. What we don't know, obviously, is if that money comes, will it be given for a specific purpose? Because sometimes we have funding, like this year, there was money given to us, and we have, in the allocations, and we have to spend it on specific things. There was some that we had to go to the ambulance trust, there was some for mental health. So it will depend on how that money comes. If it's, here's a pot of gold, and we get to decide, then it would go through the governing bodies to prioritise. If it comes with strings, obviously then we have to look at what those things we have to do. But until that comes out, we wouldn't actually be able to answer the question fully. That makes sense.
So I think, Joe, with you again, the gentleman to your right here.
My name is John Peppiat. I'm a public member of Lean Commissioning, previously a member of Link. I have a question. I'm concerned at the risk of patient safety at A&E and KGH. This group was originally designed for 100,000 patients per annum, but now has to cope with 300,000 and growing demand. KGH is some £29 million in the red, and for the last 5 years have been asking for £50 million to build an urgent care hub. I don't see how you continue to build all these homes, increase the population for these sort of services. I mean, eventually the CQC is going to look at A&E, at KGH, and say it's not fit for purpose. So what's the commissioning group going to do about that? That's my question.
I might start us off, and again, maybe that Joe or others want to come in. So I think at the heart of your question is a really, really good question. Northamptonshire has levels of population growth and housing growth that are greater than many of our surrounding counties. I've spent the last 10 years working in Leicestershire, and there isn't anything like the level of population growth that you see in Northamptonshire. And when you go into areas like Kettering and Corby, that level of growth is more significant again. And the heart of your question is about the capacity within the A&E department in Kettering Hospital and whether it's got enough space to be able to cope with the level of demand that is there. So the commissioning group is working very closely with Kettering Hospital. We work very closely with the Chief Exec, I do, Simon Weldon there, with their medical team and also with their chair, Alan Burns. We are supporting and helping to develop the business case to be resubmitted to the national bodies seeking funding in order to be able to improve the A&E facilities that we have at Kettering. You might be aware that that was a business case that was submitted last year and wasn't successful in securing funding. We've done a lot of further work together with the Acute Trust in order to remake that case, and we will be resubmitting a estate strategy for the Health and Care Partnership, of which this is identified as the top priority from an estate's point of view in terms of investment if we can be successful in securing that. We are also working very closely with others who may be able to influence those national prioritisation processes, and in particular with the local MPs who have taken a very keen interest in the capital case for Kettering. And I know, having spoken with the local MPs in that part of our county over the last month, that they are actively, in spite of other things that might be preoccupying them at the moment, they are very actively involved in trying to support our county to make the case for that much needed investment. So I hope that answers or relates to an element of the question. I don't know whether Julie wanted to perhaps, or Angela, to pick up on perhaps the wider piece around kind of capacity and pressures on the acute hospitals.
Yeah, I'd like to just pick up on the fact that at any sorry. I'm Angela Dempsey, the Chief Nurse for the CCGs. At any given moment, we can actually see the activity in Kettering. There's a really Gucci dashboard, so it's on my phone. So at any point, we can tell you how many people are approaching the A&E department and the flow through the hospital, which is really, really important in terms of quality and safety. So my team, which we spoke about earlier today, that we had a quality and safety team, are cited all of the time in terms of the activity. Yeah, it's the volume, but I wanted to link it to the presentation from my colleague. So we know about the activity is great, and what we're trying to do is put systems in place so the community can do more, so that they can stop people actually getting to the hospital, because I think that's really important, because most people do need to go into hospital, but some people don't. So we need to work with all our providers to do that. Parallel to that, obviously, Toby and colleagues are working on a way forward, but in the interim, I just want to assure you, we are cited on quality and safety all of the time at Kettering. I know it doesn't stop the capacity right now, but I just want to assure you in terms of what happens to patients when they get in there, that's something that we keep cited on. Yeah. So I just want you to be assured of that. We know that there's a capacity issue, but we're very much cited on that, and we take it very seriously. I know. And can I also point as well is it's for nursing as well. It takes 3 years to train a nurse, but as we heard before, we've done a great deal in Northamptonshire and introducing new roles. So we're looking at different sort of workforce, because I appreciate it does take a long time to train a doctor, but we don't always need doctors to do certain things. So we can have different practitioners. So we are now having an associate nurse, a bit similar to the enrolled nurse, if you remember back, because I'm quite a mature nurse now. So, so we are thinking quite strategically now, and pharmacy assistants. So we need to actually step up to the plate and have different practitioners.
Okay, thank you for your question, sir. I'm going to take a question that I've got that was pre-submitted, then I'm going to come back to people who are in the room, if that's okay. So I've got a question that I'm going to read out here that was submitted through to us, and it's about healthcare for the homeless. So the question is, the homeless in Wellingborough and across the country often struggle to access the mental and physical health care that they desperately need. please could the CCGs engage with agencies such as Wellingborough Homeless Forum, Teen Challenge, Daylight Centre and Winter Night Shelter, and attempt to reduce this to avoid the most vulnerable people being sent to hospital in ambulances and rebounding back onto the streets. So thank you for that question that was submitted through to us. Touches on a very significant area for us in terms of the services we commission. I think I'm looking at one of my GP colleagues in the room who has a microphone in his hand, who I think is going to give an initial response to that and perhaps suggest how we can follow that up.
Hello everyone, can you hear me? Microphone 4? Okay, so I'm Dr. Chris Ellis, I'm a GP in Wellingborough. I was told about this question approximately 20 minutes ago, so I'm doing well. Okay, I know the individual asked the question, I know the individual is very passionate about this question as well. At the moment, the system is slightly fragmented, and I would suggest also in other areas of the county it is the same. I'm hoping with the NHCP, I'm sorry to use abbreviations, that we're going to start to move social care and medical care together. And actually this is probably more of a social care issue, which unfortunately the individuals seem to obtain medical care, which is probably inappropriately. It may start to impact on some of Stuart's work. I see Stuart over there, yep. And also ties in with your original presentation about social and health joining together. There is probably also some work around the councils as well, because they also have their homeless strategy policies.
Thank you for that, Chris. I think there's also something we can probably do to follow up with the person who's asked that question and link some of our teams with them as well to see what more we can do, because it was a very practical ask, I think, at the heart of that, which was, can we just get some people linked together and talking with each other a bit more? And we need to do that as well as some of the strategic stuff we've talked about. So we do have your contact details, so we'll make sure that we follow that up. So thank you for that question. Let's come back into the room. I think there's a gentleman on the table here next to Chris, and we've got a microphone, and then I'll come across to the other table.
Thank you, Toby. Bill Nelson, Burton Latimer, PPG. I'd just like to say this has been an excellent revelation for me being here today. And I belong to a very, very active, very useful PPG. And that leads me into the question of communication, because clearly there's got to be a societal cultural shift. Yeah. You can't do this on your own. You are a relatively small proportion of the population. And it seems to me that the PPGs are potentially a very useful vehicle for you to communicate this message to local communities. And recently we've done some work locally where we took the model that we wanted to communicate and did it graphically and pictorially. And that's been very well received, and get them out there. And yes, it's beginning to build up awareness and communication, but that communication and support for the shift. We've got lots of people who are very fixed in their views of what the NHS should be. I want to see a doctor, I should see a doctor. Ain't going to happen. So we've got to help people understand the excellent work that you're doing to bring about that change. And so I would just make that plea for some support in there, some communication through the PPGs to get it into the local populations.
I'm going to ask Joe, perhaps one of our chairs, and Julie just to give a response to your question, but can you just hold on to the microphone, because I'm interested once I've done that, and whether you've got any thoughts about how we could work better with PPGs in terms of responding to your question. But Joe, I don't know if you'd like to give a view, and perhaps Julie as well.
So I think it is extremely important that we work with our population. I think we can certainly learn from some of the partners that we work with within the county. The Mental Health and Community Trust in particular has always worked very closely with the population. I think there's a lot more that we can do. Certainly our aspiration is to work together. One of the things about putting the clinical items on the agenda tonight is to actually understand what people think, and not just the typical groups that come to meetings. We are very much focused on making sure that we get to all of the groups within the population as well. So I think you're absolutely right. I think using the PPGs, looking at how we work with things like health and wellbeing there are lots of community organisations. There's a whole wealth of information out there. So I think you're absolutely right about using our community connectors, working together, and that's very much the way forwards, and listening to our population. So completely support what you've suggested, and obviously that's something we will take forward from from a communications point of view. Shall I pop you on to Julie?
Yeah, I just wanted to say about the fact that the PCNs also will be having a PPG. So that'll be the PPGs within the practices that are part of the PCN. So I think from my perspective, you get a groundswell, because some of the PPGs are quite small and they aren't very loud. So I think you get that groundswell where people are coming together over, you know, sort of like over more practices. But what I heard an idea last night, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. So I went to visit a PCN, I went to one of their meetings, and they've got a social prescribing link worker, and she happened to be there as well. And she's going to actually be a conduit between the PPG group, yeah, and you know the things that she's going to be doing, because actually that's the bit that's going to be tricky. People want to go to the doctor because they want to see their GP. They want to get a tablet, or they want something. And actually, I think the whole point of the social prescribing is going to be the most difficult thing, because people are going to be it's going to be more demedicalised, and therefore people aren't going to like it. So I think linking the PPG with the social prescribing link worker, I just thought that was a really good idea, actually. And those comms, perhaps I can talk to you. I don't, you perhaps wanted to...
Yeah, I was interested in any thoughts you might have on how we could, because I totally agree with you. I think all my experience in Leicestershire, we ran primary PPG networks, we drew together the PPGs on a regular basis. It was one of the most value-adding forums that we actually had, because it gave us very direct feedback and input. So what are your thoughts on how we might?
Well, firstly, on the PCNs, our last two meetings of the PPG have been very thoroughly briefed on the developments and what's going on, so we're very used on that. Good. But the problem there is the people who attend, it's a fairly small PPG, but the problem there is you're in effect preaching to the converted. Yeah. You've got to get out to the general population. And what we did with our graphical posters, which I'll happily share with you, because I do the PR for, I have to get the advert in, the BSA Owners Club, motorcycles. And I've been refused 3 times for social prescription for Tesco Momentum for my motorbike. So I have a grouse. But those groups, those are the social groups, the churches, the play groups, particularly getting younger people involved, because there are older people who aren't going to change. Their expectations, they'll tolerate the changes. The real cultural change will come through getting through to the younger people. And we see this so much in the way diets are changing and people's expectation with food, and that healthy living drive is going through. The younger people are the ones who've got to get involved. So we've got to look at how we can communicate in the ways of communication that suit those younger people in their social networks, because that's where you'll drive the cultural change. And then we've all got to be, and I include myself this as one of the older ones, be there to support them and answer the questions when asked them. So it's not easy. But, you know, what you're doing is tremendous. And I can only vouch my support for it.
Thank you for that and for the feedback. I'm glad you found today interesting so far. I'm sure that Julie in particular, because of her lead role in my team around primary care and general practice and PCNs, will be keen to hook up with you to capture some of those thoughts, and if you can share that would be great as well. So thank you for that conversation. I'm going to come to the table, I think, over here on your table. I think there was a hand that went up. Yes, the lady behind you there, Darren.
Janet Hathaway, I'm chair of the East Northamptonshire Locality Patient Engagement Group.
Wow, okay, great.
And my question really follows on from this gentleman's. We coordinate the PPGs in East Northampton. We've been very fortunate in the past that the CCG has supported a structure of representational PPI, right from the PPGs right through to Patient Congress, which has worked very well, and we've had some marvellous support from staff, Francis Crick House. My question is about the partnership. What is your picture of PPI in the partnership in the future? The partnership's going to be much broader than area. Are we going to lose our representational structure? Is PPI going to be reduced to survey monkeys? Or can we hope that we'll still have an opportunity through our representatives of talking to those who are leading the partnership?
Great question, so thank you for sharing those. I'll start off with a bit of a response, but I might be interested as well, Tanji, if you might want to say a word as well or two in a moment, but let me, if I just, firstly, the partnership and the health and care partnership that we've described today, I've talked a lot about kind of Northamptonshire and doing things across, and perhaps what we haven't emphasised enough is that the health and care partnership is about doing things at different levels of place where it makes sense to across Northamptonshire. What we're not going to do is lift everything up and just do it once in a common way across the whole of the county. And there's three sort of levels of place that we're very much shaping the work we're doing through the partnership around. The very local neighbourhood primary care network kind of level, and engagement needs to be absolutely embedded and woven through that. The locality level, or the kind of unitary authority footprint level, which we're all sort of gearing up for how do we work differently with those new geographies. And then at the Northamptonshire-wide level in terms of the overall partnership. And we've got to find a way to do the sensible things once at those different levels of place, but not lose the thread of patient and public involvement throughout them. If we end up moving to a world that's just about serving monkey, useful though that is, and there is a place for that, we've lost something. And I know, and Tanji chairs the Collaborative Stakeholder Forum for the Health and Care Partnership at the moment, and we've had some very good conversations there, both about the things that aren't working well enough at the minute, and I think we have lost our way a bit in terms of the link with some of the forums, but also how we can strengthen those things moving forward. So I'd be interested in your take.
Well, I think there's two strands. One is that the CCG has now, the board recently approved and endorsed a comms and engagement strategy, Janet. So that is in place, and it can only work through very good links with the patient and public in a whole variety of ways. And so that's well articulated in that plan, and it's got to be realised. And then within the county, there was a big event in March where the county, through the work of the CCG and Healthwatch, began to think about how can we work in a better way with patients and public, because I think in the past we'd been quite frightened of that. That ended up with a report, and I think any of you who looked around at the showcasing at the beginning of this event saw the Healthwatch stand, and there's a very good report that's going to be published there about the things we do well, but the things we need to do better. On top of that, as Toby has said, the structures in the county might appear to be interesting and complicated, but there's a celebration of place. And in doing so, there's now going to be a county-wide comms strategy which brings in one version of the truth. I knew somebody else used the term earlier, but it is, if you hear it through that mechanism, then you know it's true and real. And to make that work, we're looking for a citizens panel. We're using a whole variety of forms of engagement, and some of those are more modern than we've used in the past. So I think you're going to see a lot more public engagement events, cross boundaries, not just single organisations, but actually embracing place in particular. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that and for the question. I'm very conscious that we've just tripped past the 6:30 point, so I'm going to take one more question in the room from the lady at the front, and then just to give them a heads up, I'm then going to, you've heard a lot from me this evening, and I think it's about time we heard a little bit more from our two chairs. So I'm going to ask our two clinical chairs just to say a few closing remarks after we've taken the next question and the last one. So Joe, just to your left. Yep, front table.
Thank you very much, and it was really interesting to hear about the PPGs and obviously involvement. It's something that is very dear to my heart, but I didn't see a lot of it in your presentation. It's all right for those that are in a PPG. It's very patchy across the county. And I think there needs to be a coordination role here. I've attended quite a lot of these things, and we've brought it up over the past year about how we strengthen patient participation, involvement, listening to voices, and I don't think there's a lot of it going on. And I'm sorry to say that, but I'd rather say it as it is. Because I've been trying to get in to a PPG for the last year. I know that somebody else, you know, others in the room, and we're just not being listened to. We're not being involved. We're not being told how we can get together. So to me, there's very little of it, and it just needs bringing together. I've said this to you before. Thank you.
And thank you for making those comments and sharing that perspective with us again. And it's interesting, whenever we get groups of people together, you always get that range and that spectrum. We've got some examples of tremendous things happening with PPGs thriving and people doing some really interesting, innovative things. And it's really sad and disappointing to hear that in some other areas people perhaps are struggling for whatever reason to kind of get that off the ground more. I would say, and I noticed a couple of the people nodding at parts of that kind of conversation, if you're in a practice where you're struggling to engage with your PPG, let us know, because we can help with that. We can and should be trying to bridge that and to understand how we can support people. Patient participation groups should be open to all within a practice. They're there to respect and listen to the diversities of views that exist within it. I know that isn't always easy. I know that for all sorts of reasons, there may have been issues or challenges in the past in some of that, but we've got to find a way through that. So if there are those of you in the room who are more at that end of the spectrum with your practices than you are over at this end of the spectrum, let us know, pick it up with the comms team here afterwards or with Julie, who leads our primary care work, and we can then pick those conversations up with practices. So thank you for sharing that. And it's a good reminder that for all the great things that happen and the things that work really well, there are always areas where we don't necessarily get it right all of the time. And that's, you know, a sort of truism across much of the NHS. Well, look,
Have you got access to a photocopy here? No.
Have we got access to a photocopier? In order to...
I've got the PPG rules.
Oh, have you?
Or put them with the things so that they are accessible online rather than just for me.
Well, let's perhaps look at how we can share that. Thank you for raising that, because that's a handy little thing to have in your back pocket. Yeah. Okay, that's good. Well, let's get that drawn in and see how we can share that across the PPGs as well. I don't think we've got a copier in the room, but it'll be helpful if you could pick that up when we come to the end of the session. So thank you for that offer. Right, I'm going to thank everyone in the room from myself before I hand over to the two chairs. I think we've had a great evening, lots of thoughts, lots of good perspectives, and we've downloaded an awful lot. I'd really be interested in your feedback on what has or hasn't worked for you with the session today. Did we try and cover a bit too much ground? Would you have rather a smaller number of things in a bit more detail? How can we make this a bit more interesting and interactive and build on what we've done tonight going into next year? But at that point, I will thank you all for your time and wish you a safe journey, and hand over to Darren and to Joe just for a few closing thoughts from them.
Get to go first. So again, very much want to thank everybody for coming.
Joe, do you want to head this way so that you're in, for anyone who's watching us online or on catch-up?
Apologies, I have not appeared on screen, so here I am on screen. So really just wanted to reiterate thank you very much to all of you who've taken the time to come. We hope that it's been of interest. If there are things that you want to know that we haven't told you about, we are an open organisation. We are really happy to hear your thoughts. We are here because we want to make care for the population of Northamptonshire better. We want to make journeys more seamless. The reason we do this job is to make sure that patients get better care, that they're not aware of all the different organisations that we have, and they just feel like they're being really well looked after. So anything that we can do and any information you can give us that allows us to do that, we would be really, really grateful. And so really just at this point want to thank you, and I will hand over to Darren to see if there's anything left for him to say.
This is always very difficult. So again, I don't know if we thanked our teams enough. So the team over there really pulled all of this together, and we have a huge debt of thanks for all of that. I think just to close off, the whole point of the NHS changes back in 2011 and 2012 was really to drive clinicians to step forward so that they could really lead the changes in the NHS, but by working with the local population to deliver better health services for that local population. So again, just a heartfelt thanks for all of you for taking the time to come today. For all of our health and care partners, I see many of them who've been with us many years to help this journey. I think there are a lot of changes happening that the system hasn't been right for that to really, the platform hasn't been there to really drive through the changes. So I think through the Health and Care Partnership, through all the health and social care partners working better together, driven by the patient needs, I think we'll get there. So I'm very hopeful for the next year. I'm hopeful that next time we come and talk to you in a year's time, that we'll have a lot more slides on what we've been able to achieve and the improvements we've been able to deliver. So thank you very much. Safe journey home.
I've just been asked to say that the feedback forms will be coming out electronically. Please do fill them in and please do communicate with us. Thank you.